Hey, it is Tuesday, June 16th, and this is the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. We're on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. Today we'll get some coronavirus updates. Lawmakers are introducing the strongest policies against China and looking into this week's scriptures, especially the book of Matthew. So how are you guys doing today? We're going straight up and strong into this week already. It's already Tuesday, but I'm just glad that all of you can do it together here on the Morning Star Drive. Everyone, just keep liking, keep commenting. It's getting kind of busy in the commenting section. I really like it, and I want to hear from you guys and see how you're doing too. Put all your requests, the song requests you have, put your testimonies in there, and I'll definitely share them with many people as possible. Last Sunday, the Sunday edition, we met Lilia Hamann from Germany. Fun and honest interview, just learning who she is and what her goals and dreams are. It was a graceful time, so be sure to catch up on that, the Sunday edition. So let's get into the featured artist of the day. Today's featured artist is the Sumney Boys, as the new album is out. I'm going to play my favorite song on the album, and my favorite song is Nothing Could Go Wrong. The second song is from Kumachang in Japan, and that song we're going to listen to is called Fighter.
This could be a fast life, a short life, depending how you living. Nothing could go wrong if I'm with you, it's so fulfilling. And if you keep the time, really God walks with you. Not even just walks with you, he will even talk with you, that is right. Been feeling life is different, everything depends on me. And having my own thoughts, that's really a test to me. The more I make myself, the more valuable I become. I have to take action, that's the final outcome. How could I ever forget the moments that we spent together? It's those past memories that will put you together. It's what you do after the mess up that counts. I give glory and thanks even in times of doubt. Don't just say you have the heart but don't do it. You say you want, you gotta show him and prove it. You have to be a life the Lord really remembers. Don't just walk around for no reason, do better. I have the Lord, then nothing could go wrong. I can't be scared to proclaim it, I have to tell the world. Foot on the gas, pushing the pace as I start this race. I have to get my mind straight so I can become great. The time I have now, I really must cherish. It could be gone at any moment, it really just vanish. I know, it's been a while since I sat and even wrote a song. I wonder if my words sound good or even flow at all. And how I want to share your words to the entire world. Alright, I'm sorry, let me fix myself. If I think of you, I know I will do well. It's times like these, I know I will prevail. Don't just say you have the heart, but don't do it. You say you want, you gotta show him and prove it. You have to be a life the Lord really remembers. Nothing could go wrong if we do it together.
この先は自分のためのステージ、生きるという最初の1ページ。I'm a fighter、 心の中で唱えた、自分に負けたくないと思えた、だけど途絶えた、行いがないならばまるで燃料切れのライター。誰が なんとロード関係ない一種の判断で決まるリブは大締めるベルト道がアスファルトでも進むウエスト尽くすベスト夢と現実の狭間で揺れ動いてるだけど絶対諦めない戦い続けるため己に打ち勝つまで挑戦し続けるだけどんな壁も突き破れ心に火を灯せ熱くないなら嘘だろ靴底は全て知ってる歩んできた道のりを見据えるいや道のりの実の字もまだ来てねえ諦めるのなら実りもねえ感覚を研ぎ澄ませ今刻め生きるという最高の1ページどんな失敗も恐れなくていい何度転んでも起き上がればいい自分の感情を信じてスタンダップ立ち止まってもソウルまで捨てんな夢と現実の狭間から逃げ出したくなるだけどこの勝負負けられない戦い続けるため己に打ち勝つまで挑戦し続けるだけどんな壁もぶち壊せ心に火を灯せ選んだ道なら熱くないなら嘘だろそうお前は決して一人じゃないだろう
And that was Fighter from Kumachung, and that first song was from the new Summoning Boys album Tales of a Longing Heart, and that song was, what was it called? Nothing Could Go Wrong. It's one of my favorite songs from the new album. I hope you guys enjoyed that one too. So that moves us into today's coronavirus updates for today. Coronavirus updates, we hit a new milestone. Well, it seems like we're hitting milestones all the time, right? In the world right now, we hit 8 million cases. And if we think about it, the cases aren't the important thing. The more important thing is the mortality rate, how many people are actually dying. It's at 436,000 for the entire world. And once again, the mortality rate has dropped to 5.43%. The U.S. too their mortality rate has dropped, not as much as the world, but still going strong, and the mortality rate is going down for the U.S. also. It's 2.16%. Sorry, not 2.16%. What am I saying? 2.16 million cases, 118,000 deaths at 5.45% mortality rate. Brazil still moving up. They're getting close to a million too. They're at 868,000 cases. 43,000 deaths, which we know now is second in the world for most deaths by a country. However, their rate's down to 5%. So it's going down a lot, right? As much as, they're struggling with this right now, it's actually going down a lot. It's down to 5%, which is under a lot of countries. India's at 333,000 cases with 9,500 deaths at almost 3%. Peru's very similar, almost 3%. 230,000 cases, 6,700 deaths. Chile's at 174,000 cases, 3,300 deaths at 1.9%. Pakistan, kind of just rounding out the countries with the most amount of cases on a daily basis. They're at 144,000 cases with 2,700 deaths at 1.9%. And of course, those of you, I know that people in the Philippines were asking me, just keep them updated on the Philippines. 25,000 cases, 1,000 deaths at 4.23%, not doing too bad. If you take it into consideration, it's in Southeast Asia, is not so good in Southeast Asia, but on a world scale, it's actually pretty good. Just another update to keep up on Sweden, the only country that didn't do lockdown, their mortality rate is already down to 9.3%, and they're going to soon go under 9%. So that's a really big deal because everyone's wondering if the way they handled the coronavirus was the right way of doing it. But interestingly, they had a lot of high cases in the beginning, but they're dropping like very, very quickly. So that's something to keep in mind, that maybe, the way they did it wasn't actually that bad. Beijing. What am I thinking? Belgium. Okay. Belgium, highest mortality rate in the world. They dropped again to 16.07%. So they should be hitting under 16% also. So that's another good news. Other good news here too. The cases, yesterday the cases went up for record lows, meaning the U.S. is U.S. is usually around like 20,000, and they're about 20,000 cases. But Brazil's now under 20,000, which is quite interesting. They're at 2% growth rate. India's at 11,000, so that's a big jump. They were hitting anywhere from 8,000 to 9,000. Yesterday was 11,000, so they're in like the 5 digits, right? So they're over 10. They're at 11,000 cases in a day at 3%, which is, considering they have over 1 billion people, it's quite impressive. Chile is at 6,900 cases for the day at 4% increase, and Pakistan is 6,800, but that's a 5% increase too. Once again, Brazil, second most deaths in the world, but the mortality rate steadily going down, which is a very, very good sign. Interestingly, in Beijing, in China, second straight day of resurgence of the coronavirus, and a lot of these tough measures are being reinstated once again because of these cases coming up 2 days in a row. People are saying that these were hidden before. There's much more than this, but they're actually not stopping, but they're going to postpone their reinstatement of schools. So like next week, second and third graders are supposed to go back to school, but now because of this, it looks like they are not going back to school, which is quite interesting that it's popping up once again. If we look at today's current news, one of the big things that's coming up actually is this big thing on sanctions on China, right? And we know that because, they call this like the Beat China bill, and it was made by like 150 lawmakers. They came together and they discussed, and they brought it to Congress like, hey, in order for us to beat China, we have this Beat China bill with like tons of different sanctions and policies on it. And of course, a bunch of things are happening in the U.S. They're trying to boost manufacturing so they're not so dependent on China. I think they want to incentivize pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and supply because they were overly dependent on China. And how do we know? Because a lot of American companies had like medical supplies made in China, but they couldn't send them over because they stopped exporting, which is a huge thing. That's why Americans couldn't get those medical supplies. And they're doing it for mainly the safety of Americans. Not saying that China's trying to destroy America, but safety is, if they can't get the medical supplies out, that's a big thing that's for the safety of Americans. And they find it very crucial to bring manufacturing back home to the U.S., especially during the pandemic, or during like kind of more of the peak times where it's like really like stressing and threatening. China was threatening to keep important drugs away from the U.S. because they're produced over there in China, right? So it's kind of even more reason not to rely on China. Lots of tech theft going on, and I know that America's also going to be like raising their defense like there's going to be a defense policy bill for like $740 billion. But obviously to keep up with China, they kind of say it's like a new Cold War coming between America and China, and it's also not just for the defense of like military, but it's also to strengthen the U.S. supply chain, and it also imposes limits, like say missile defense systems, anything that's done with Chinese companies or with the Chinese military. Like these types of things are happening. Also, new measures to restrict capital flow through Hong Kong because of the new security law that China is imposing. And basically, China uses Hong Kong as a loophole to get around trade embargoes. It's quite interesting. And Twitter, actually, Twitter is quite interesting. They dismantled like 170,000 accounts because they were backed by a Chinese communist regime. So they were kind of like accounts that kind of artificially push narratives supporting like, it's like supporting stuff like China is not the ones that started it. It was from the U.S. government. U.S. military brought coronavirus to China, or things against Taiwan, or protests, stuff about the protests in Hong Kong. So that's a big thing. So that's what this Beat China bill is doing. It's like a 115-page report, sanctions against China from 150 lawmakers that got together. How we're going to do this, and kind of if you look at the prelude, it's about, you got to change the way you think about China, right? The old way of thinking of China has failed. We got to find new ways to go against China. So it starts off with like sanctions against the highest ranking officials, especially over human rights abuses. Human rights abuses has to do with what? Like people like the government officials that are in charge of like the affairs with Hong Kong. Like it's brutal over there right now. So even the vice premier of China, like they're saying we should basically have sanctions against these people because of human rights abuses, freezing assets in the U.S., suspending visas and all their family members if they're in the U.S., and they want to crack down against. And then also Chinese government officials that crack down and put violence against churches, destroy their buildings. Also, those in charge of persecuting Tibet and also Muslims. So that's pretty strong sanctions. Highest ranking officials in China. So basically, they won't even be able to come to the States, right? They want to target sanctions against Chinese companies, especially those Chinese companies that steal tech secrets, IP theft, cutting them off from the U.S. banking systems. Also making it easier for U.S. companies to sue Chinese companies that steal tech secrets. So that's another big thing there. They also want Chinese companies to disclose if they have Communist Party committees within their company and how much support they get from the Chinese government. Why? Because investors need to know about these things. Also, senior level Chinese officials and their family members get their visas revoked, and the U.S. should expand trade relations with other Asian countries. One of the reasons is because other Asian countries do want to say things against China, but they can't because a lot of their supply chain is in China. So that makes it really difficult for them to say certain things. And one of the biggest things they want to do is boost semiconductors made in the U.S. Those of you who don't know what semiconductors are, these are like the most essential thing in almost every electronics, from cell phones to almost all electronic devices have semiconductors, and even things for defense like radars and missiles use semiconductors also. So it looks like America is also going to be pouring billions, tens of billions of dollars into chip development in the U.S. Now, the U.S. does make the best chips in the world. However, a lot of their manufacturing is in China, so that's a big problem that they're facing right now at the moment. China, the only reason that they moved up very fast is because of a lot of tech theft, like stealing intellectual property, and of course a lot of things that are made in China they would just take it and make it themselves. So when I was looking at some news reports about China, if America takes like semiconductors and all these big companies leave, like even Apple and other countries like this, it will greatly affect how well China does in the tech industry, because they have nothing to steal anymore, right? So part of the biggest reason they were able to grow so much is because they had all the technology here in China. But it looks like we don't know if it's going to come to law, but these sanctions were basically brought up by these 150 lawmakers, and it was called the Beat China Bill. So it's very, very interesting to see if this actually goes through. Because if it goes through, this is going to be like a real Cold War. The sanctions and policies against each other, and who knows if a real war is going to start, especially when if they actually do like a real hostile takeover of Hong Kong and things get really, really bad with the protests. I wouldn't doubt that America would go in to try to free Hong Kong, and also might as well do Taiwan at the same time. But it's something where in the world scale people will not say anything bad about it, because a lot of countries are really, really railing against China at the moment. All right, so with that in mind, that moves us on to our praise section, and I hope that you guys will be able to enjoy today's praise. The first song that we're going to hear, we can sing and praise the Holy Trinity together, is Do It Quickly, and the second song is Entrust It to the Lord.
Must act quickly, don't delay. Listen to me, you whom I love. Time marches on when everything's past. Your chance to gain will fade. Therefore, take action quickly and don't delay. For everything, there is a right time. When time is past, that work can be high. We must quickly act. Miracles will surely take place. An ideal world, a world of happiness will then exist, never ending. Since Lord God watches so anxiously, please heed His words. From now on, you must not be idle. Entrust all your fears to the Lord, all your cares and burdens. The Lord cares for you, He shall come to your aid. When the time comes, He'll reach out, He shall raise you up higher. When the time comes, the Lord God's hand will guide your path, for His and for His will. He'll use you for the right work. And today, through the Spirit, it will be inspired to help you. If you entrust your life only to the Lord. Right to live with Him in this time. Trust and wait till the end. Wait for your time. Self-centered thoughts lead you astray. Those thoughts will block your path. They will always hold you back. Once again, give your whole life
And that is entrusted to the Lord. And also the first song was Do It Quickly. I hope you guys enjoyed those praise songs together. It's no matter what the news comes in the world, if we have praise, it just feels a little different, right? And one of the things that we know is when Sunsteam talks about giving praise to God and the Holy Trinity, the first thing it does is it casts out Satans and demons, right? Because they hate the sounds of praise. So if you're ever feeling in a bad mood, if you're ever feeling like, man, I don't feel good, one of the things you can do, the best thing you can do is just praise and give glory. You just get rid of all those bad, negative spirits that are around you, those Satans and demons that just kind of, bother your heart and your mind. We just got to praise first. And then after we praise, whether we listen to praise or we praise with our own lips, after that, we can kind of get ourselves back into a better frame of mind and bring our hearts and our minds back to the Lord. All right. So today we're going to go into the scriptures today. And I want to talk a little bit about Matthew, because one of the scriptures comes from, I believe it's the parable of the talents, or the parable of the talents of gold, or the bags of gold. I believe it's the bags of gold, right? And that's all the way in Matthew chapter 25. And many of us know that Matthew chapter 24 and 25 are like what you call the Lord's second coming chapters. Matthew chapter 24 begins with the disciples coming to Jesus and asking him, hey, what are the signs of your coming in the end of this age, right? And then Jesus just begins to run off all the different signs, whether it's like earthquakes, natural disasters, persecution, wars, rumors of wars, famines, people being persecuted, dying for the history. There's a lot of different things that come up in chapter 24. And then chapter 25 that Matthew gives is mainly talking about parables that describe what the time of the Lord's second coming is going to be like. And the very first parable is about the 10 virgins, and the second one is about the parable of the bags of gold, or the talents. Okay, so first I want to just kind of get into who Matthew is. Now, a lot of us know he's a tax collector. He's a tax collector. He's one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, right? The one that he lived together with Jesus. And he's a saint. The Catholic Church gave him the title of a saint. And another name that he uses is also Levi. So he's either referred to Matthew in his own book, and he's referred to as Levi, son of Alphaeus, in Mark and Luke. The Gospels of Mark and Luke refer to him as Levi, son of Alphaeus, which is quite interesting, right? And according to the New Testament, we all know this. He's already one of the 12 apostles, but something very interesting, he's known as one of the 4 evangelists. Now, I don't want you guys to kind of misunderstand when I say, he's not the same evangelist that we're talking about. Because when we talk about, he's one of the 4 evangelists, which means he went around preaching and no, that's not that type of preaching. Like, it's still preaching, but not quite the one that we think. He's the 4 evangelists are the people who wrote the 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, and the reason is, the people that wrote the 4 Gospels, evangelist comes from the Greek word evangelion, right? Evangelion, which means good news, or also means gospel. Okay, so the gospel of Christ. The gospel is the good news, and the evangelion also means good news, and that's why they call him one of the 4 evangelists. And they were evangelists because through their writings they proclaimed the good news of Jesus. If that makes sense to you, right? They may not have done it with their bodies. Well, some of them probably did, but they were people that did it through their writings. Matthew was a tax collector in the region of Capernaum. And those of you, we all know that it's considered one of the most reviled professions in Israel. And, we read in the scriptures, it talks about these tax collectors always collect more than they should, and they just keep the difference of what they have to pay the government. But the reason why a tax collector back in those days was considered it wasn't even like little bad. They were considered it's betrayal to take the position of a tax collector. Why? It's because the tax collector was a Jew. It wasn't a Roman. So what the Romans would do is that the Roman government would contract a Jew to do this job of collecting money from the Jews. So if any Jew took that job, basically it's considered betrayal. That's why it was considered such a reviled position, which also kind of shows like the mercy or the love of Christ, that taking a tax collector in, which is like the worst of the worst, like a betrayer. Right? The Jews actually thought that a tax collector was the embodiment of sin. They're just known to steal money, and basically what it is the richer the tax collector was, the assumption is the more they stole. And you gotta kind of get an idea of how bad it was, because think about this. Those of you who know, who was the person in charge of the money of the 12 disciples? It wasn't even Matthew. And this guy's an accountant. He's an accountant. He's a tax collector. He's someone, that comes to Christ. But they even then they didn't trust him, and they put Judas Iscariot instead of him, which is even crazier because Judas Iscariot was the one that stole money from the bag, and on top of it, he was the one that betrayed Jesus. Like, how ironic, right? That the one that they couldn't trust, because they had this really bad notion, like this bad preconceptions of about tax collectors, they wouldn't even put him in charge of the money. And they put Judas Iscariot instead of it, and look what happened. Quite interesting, right? Another thing about Matthew, the Apostle Matthew, is he's one of the eyewitnesses for Jesus' ministry, because he's one of the 12, right? And they said that he had probably the most amount of knowledge of the 12 besides Peter, James, and John, which were like the closest to Jesus, right? The first to be called by Christ. So Matthew would be the fourth. So Peter, James, and John were the closest of close, right? They were the three that worked together as fishermen. They were close friends, and they were the first to be called by Christ. And even when they went into the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus would leave 9 of them behind, and then go deeper into the Garden of Gethsemane with Peter, James, and John, and then he himself would go even further. So you see that they weren't quite like Peter, James, and John, who were very, very close. Okay. Another thing you should know about Matthew, because he's a tax collector, one of the things he had to do was write records. So he was most likely educated and could probably write like a scribe, right? Especially because of the documents he had to write so that he can give it to the government, saying how much he collected and such. How did he die? Interestingly, scholars are arguing, like majority of scholars say that he died as a martyr. Because there is some evidence out there saying that he died a natural death, like the Apostle John, but most of it is that he's a martyr. But there's no consensus how he died. So there's 4 different ways how scholars are thinking that he died. Like, just take a stab. Sorry, that was a really bad pun because he got stabbed. Like, one of them is stabbed. Sorry. Bad joke. Yeah. So he was either burned, stoned, stabbed, or beheaded. One of the 4, right? And those are the 4 that people kind of looked at Matthew and being martyred in one of those ways. So it's quite interesting. But they actually said that there's not a lot of information about Matthew in the Bible, and they say Matthew is only mentioned 7 times in the Bible. In the entire New Testament, Matthew, one of the 12, was only mentioned 7 times, which is not that much. If we get into the parable of the bags of gold, which is quite interesting, the last time I heard this very, very seriously was right before Sunstream came out in 2018, and it was so fitting back then, because it's like, hey, guess what? The owner went away and left you some bags of gold, and the bags of gold were supposed to be like missions, right? That we all had. Some had 1, some had 2, some had 5, whatever it is. And he's like, basically one of the messages before he came back out is like, hey, the owner's coming back. He's coming back from the journey, and he's gonna check with everyone to see what they've done with the missions that they were given. So it was quite, I wouldn't say scary, but it was one of those sobering moments. Like, ooh, how seriously have I? Of course, everyone works hard. People with their missions work hard do a lot of different things with their missions, but it's like that pre-warning right before the storm hits. We're like, ooh, okay, so what have I really? And you kind of get to count all the things you've done. Like, have I really done it with all my heart? And of course, no one really can really say, I think I could have done better. Everyone says that, right? And it's true, we could have done better, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of people did really, really well with their missions. It wasn't easy, and when Sunstream came out, everyone was paid accordingly. And paid accordingly, I'm not saying that people were being judged, obviously. No one was judged. It was more of you're being judged as in your blessings will come according to what you've done. And I do think that when I look at this for this week's message, the good thing about this week's message is the key verse is 21. And he said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness," right? So I have a really fond memory of this verse because I remember this verse back in 2001 or 2002. And one of the things is, you got to think about this. You know, when Sunseam says that, hey, guess what? When the message comes out, God is going to watch to see how you do with the message. And it's like, oh, okay, wow, that's kind of crazy. You know, this is amazing. So we have to do really well, and we have to be thankful, and we have to value the things that God has given us. But if you think about it in a much more deeper level, like back when I was at church in LA, just hearing the title gave us that feeling in our hearts of like, oh, yes. Like, you know, you knew what kind of message was coming. And I clearly remember this verse because when this title came out, there was a collective sigh and joy together. Like Sunseam, you know, back in this days, Sunseam would give the message and Sunseam would say, and today's message title is, "Well done, good and faithful servant," and you just hear everyone go, oh, because we knew it was going to be a good message. We're like, oh, thank God. And then everyone was like just really joyful because that's the message that God's going to go by. So I really hope that you guys too, every time the Sunday message comes out, that's what the message is going to be about, right? And that's what we got to do. So if it's a good blessing message, it's great. And this week's message is great. It is a great message. Think about it, guys. We have got the secret to how to receive more valuable things from the Holy Trinity. We've got it, right? It's amazing if you think about it. We are being blessed, and we've got the secret to blessing. So if you haven't been blessed yet, the secret's in the Sunday message. And when you hear the message every week, when you hear the title, you guys should be like, whoa, uh-oh. Or you'll be like, whoa, this is great. You know, there should be sighs of relief. There should be shouts of joy. Like, you know, can you imagine? You know, can you imagine if it's like the message is like, everyone will be forgiven? We'd be like, whoa! People would be screaming because it's the most amazing thing if everyone gets forgiven at that spot. Because I remember that in 2014, like right when the New Year's, when Sunseam forgave everyone. And yeah, well, I got a testimony about that too, but it's crazy because I'll tell you later, but I got a letter from Sunseam once. Never even asked for it, but Sunseam's letter to me was, all your sins are forgiven. I was like, it was like the most ridiculous letter I've ever received from Sunseam. That was like 2013, end of the year. But either way, that's another story that I'll talk about at another time, okay? So I hope that you guys too, with all the bags of gold that you have right now, any mission that you have, it's according to what you're able to do. So don't think that's too small. Don't think it's too big. Everyone gets according to their level, right? And your level may be at one bag right now, but it's okay because as we grow and grow more and more in this history, you'll get 2 bags and you get 5 bags, right? And as cliche as it sounds, how you do with the small things, God will give you with better things too. Okay, so I hope that all of you guys have an amazing and wonderful kind of thoughts in the message all the time, and just really think deeply about what we're receiving at this time, that it is literally God's word that comes to us. The whole world is waiting to hear what God wants to say, and we hear it every single week. And you got to be happy this week. Good job, well done, my good and faithful servant. Right? Come and share in your master's happiness. What a great message this week, guys. Be happy. It's a great week. Enjoy it. Give thanksgiving. Praise God. And I hope that you guys can give testimonies this week of things that you've received from the Holy Trinity. All right. That brings us into the song of choice for the day. I chose great song from the Bee Gees. It's called To Love Somebody. Great song, you guys. It's so good. I love this song. This is covered by another Filipino singer, and this Filipino singer, his name is Buno, right? I don't remember what his actual real name is though. I think his nickname is Buno. Something. Oh, I forget what it was, but I know his nickname is Buno. Right? Really, guys, you got to listen to his voice. When you hear his voice, you'll be so amazed. His voice is so rare. So rare. His voice is so cool. It's very raspy and husky. And it's a song. Oh, man, the lyrics are good too. But his voice, it's like a even more rougher than Michael Bolton. Right, but some of you I'm sure don't know who he is either. But this is originally from the Bee Gees. It's sung by Buno from the Philippines, and this is a live performance. And in the Philippines, they have something called the Wish Bus. It's like a bus that has like, what do you call it? It has like a studio inside where singers come in to sing, and people can hear it from the outside of the bus. And it's from a radio station called Wish 107.5. So, but it's very, very famous. If you look on the internet, these Filipino singers are so good. And this is live. So listen up. Live cover of the Bee Gees song, To Love Somebody.
There's a love,
Wish 107.5.
certain kind of love that never shone on me. I want my life to be to live with you, to live with you. There's a way everybody says to do each and every little thing, but what good does it bring if I ain't got you? I ain't got you, baby. Maybe you don't know what it's like, baby. You don't know what it's like to love somebody, to love somebody the way I love you. In my mind, will I see your face again? I know you're free of mind. You ain't got to be so blind, and I'm blind, so very blind. 'Cause I'm a man. Can't you see what I am? I live and breathe for you. But what good does it do if I ain't got you, baby? If I ain't got you, baby, you don't know what it's like, baby. You don't know what it's like to love somebody, to love somebody the way I love you. Ooh, yeah, yeah. You don't know what it's like, and baby, you don't know what it's like to love somebody, to love somebody, to love somebody. You just don't know to love somebody the way I love you. You just don't know, baby. You just don't know, baby. To love somebody, to love somebody. You don't know, yeah. To love somebody,
Wish Exclusive
to really, really love somebody
on Wish
the way I love you.
107.5.
Oh, yeah.
And that is To Love Somebody from Buno. He's from the Philippines with a great cover of that song. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Yes, tell me about his voice. His voice is so, I don't know what to say. It's raspy. It's like Bryan Adams. That's what it's like. Bryan Adams. You got to take a look at Bryan Adams. He's the one that sings like all those, what's that famous song? He sings that song Heaven. He also sings To Love a Woman. I think you guys might not know him because he's from the 80s. Yeah, it's almost likely you won't know him. But what a great voice. Yeah, for me, I just enjoy listening to Bruno sing. So that brings us into a section that I was surprised that a lot of people were looking forward to, right? It's the section where it's a series this week, right? I'm gonna continue from yesterday's testimony in 1999 August when I went to go see Sunsim in Paris. So those of you who missed the first series, you might want to listen to that one first before we get into this one, or you might not understand some of these points here. All right, so are you? Let's see. I'm thinking of what kind of music we want to play with this one. You know what I mean? Like I thought something fun would be nice. But I think, I think I'm gonna have to go straight into that same type of music I used yesterday. Yes, I know. Forgive me for being basically unoriginal. But I'm going to use the same music. This is called "Soaking in His Presence in Spirit and Truth." All right. Okay, so let's go into the second series, okay? So we heard yesterday that on the way back to the hostel, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, pops out, appears, talks to us for 5 minutes, and then like a thief in the night, just like disappears. And we're all like, oh, that's so crazy. And I told you, I was like, hey, for better or for worse, you got to be detailed. You got to be detailed in your prayers. And what happened was, we're so crazy excited. We're back at the hostel feeling amazing, right? And the rest of the day, we go out into the city and just, it's just amazing time. Then we come back to the hostel at night, we get some good sleep, and then we wake up in the morning. And in the morning, we wake up and we just hear like joy outside. Like people just in joy. You know that feeling when people are talking, but you know they're talking in such joy. Their feeling is so amazing. You know what I mean? So you wake up in the morning and it's like you can hear joy outside. And it's the Japanese team, the team that came to visit. The Providence team, and you could just hear them talking in Japanese. And even though you don't understand what they're saying, you're like, whoa, these guys are joyful. And it was a great feeling. So after we get ready, we get dressed, and we go out for breakfast. The hostel provides breakfast, and we're having like bread and butter and stuff like that with hot chocolate. And I'm just so curious why these guys are so happy, right? I'm like, So I went to one of my buddies and I said, hey, what's going on? What happened? Like, why, you guys are so happy. What's going on? And the guy says to me, he's like, oh, Sunsim invited us to his apartment yesterday. And we spent 3 hours with him. Okay, so, like I know when I talk my bubble talks and stuff that if you're, we have to support and love each other, and we have to, when something good happens to people, we have to celebrate with them, right? We should celebrate with them and not put them down. But I'm sorry, I was less than a year in Providence, and I was like, wait a second, you only spent 5 minutes with us? But you took them for 3 hours? And I'm going to tell you right now, I wasn't happy. I couldn't be happy for them. I'm just going to be honest with you. I was 19, 20 years old. I'm still maturing more and more, right? And I was starting to compare, like, what? How come they get 3 hours and we only get 5 minutes? And I was so upset. I'm going to tell you how upset I was. I didn't even tell the two guys with me because I was talking to these guys, the Japanese guys, separately, and then they said to us, "Oh yeah," and Sunsim is paying for our tour of Paris, right? So which makes me even more jealous, and I'm burning inside, like I want to, turn tables over like Jesus did in the temple courts, like rah, get out kind of thing, right? I was so angry, I was like, come on, guys, lesson here in Providence. I haven't had enough time to fix myself, okay? So I am just livid. And then they said, hey, you should come with us. And honestly, at that moment, because I was so angry, I said, no, we're not going. And I didn't even talk to the other guys. I just spoke for them. So they all went off on this tour, and the three of us are stuck. We're like stuck in the hostel. right? We could have gone on this amazing tour that Sunstein paid for, but instead, because of my, right? All of a sudden, we're stuck at the hostel. So they're like, oh, so what are we gonna do? And I'm just kind of like, I don't know, because I didn't tell them, right? Because I was just angry by myself. Okay, I was just angry. I don't know, like, angry is not the right word. I was kind of more just, I don't know what word, frustrated? I don't know. I was just kind of like, God, why did we get 5 minutes? Which is what we prayed for. We prayed for 5 minutes, honestly, right, guys? Like, you guys, I told you yesterday, for better or for worse, be detailed. So I'm telling you guys, you got to pray bigger. Just don't pray the small prayers. You got to pray the big prayers, right? And we were just kind of like for hours stuck in the hostel. We didn't know where to go, what to do. And what happened was maybe about a couple hours later, there was the Italian missionary was there, and just met them for the first time while I was there. I was like, hey, how's it going? Like, oh, and then we just greet each other and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh, where are you going? I was like, oh, no, we have to go to Sunseem's house. We got to take care of some stuff for Sunseem, not go to his house, right? So I was like, oh, okay. And then the missionary was like, hey, so did you, what are you guys doing? I was like, oh, I don't know. We're not doing anything. And then, for myself, those of you who know me, I'm a little bit bold, sometimes a little bit brash, which is, like I said, it's just like praying in detail, for better or for worse, right? I'm brash and I'm bold, for better or for worse. And, remember, I'm only 19, 20 years old at that time. And I went to her and I said, hey, do you think we can go to Sunseem's house? And of course, there's silence. I'm kind of looking like, what's the reason for this silence? But I was like, can we go over? There was silence. She looks at me and says, you know what? Let me ask. And we're like, what? So then, we go over to pray. Like, okay, guys, we could meet Sunseem, right now. So, we got to pray. And we're praying. And of course, she took a long time, like, way longer than our prayer, I was less than a year in Providence, right? So I couldn't pray that long, but, we prayed, and then we, like, sat around waiting for, like, 40, 45 minutes. And we're kind of wondering, like, did she forget? Like, is she coming back? And then she comes back, and I'm kind of like, oh, here it comes. Here's the news. And she says, oh, yeah, Ceci says come over. And we're like, what? And we're just freaking out, like, yeah, what do we do? So first we're like, like so happy. And then second, we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to meet him. What do we do? And like, we run to our rooms, take another shower. We put on some nicer clothes and everything else. And she's like, no, we don't have enough time. Got to come quickly. Like, oh my gosh. So we get ready. A car comes to pick us up and we're driving to his apartment. So we're like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy, right? And, we're just freaking out. And, we get out of the car, we go into the apartment, and we go up the elevator, and we get to his place. And they open the door for us, and it's 2 floors. So we're on the bottom floor, and first someone gives us the key points from the morning message. So we're like, okay, all right, cool. But, honestly, we're not thinking about the message. And I wasn't even listening because the whole thing in my head is like, I can barely speak Korean. I have no idea what to say to him. And I'm freaking out, right? And then, they're giving the key points in the morning message, and all I heard was this. You can't hear anything because you're just so focused on, what am I going to say to him? I'm sure a lot of us have gone through that, like when you're waiting in line to meet him and to greet him, or he's walking past, like you're like, what should I say? And you prepared something, and by the time he walks by, you completely forgot it. So I'm sitting like going, oh my gosh. And then we hear, all right, he's ready to see you. And we're like, what? So we're starting to walk up the spiral staircase. And I'm like, okay, what do we do? So as we're walking up more and more, I start to see the second floor, and I stop because there he is eating lunch by himself. I'm like, what? We're going to be alone with him. Oh my gosh, what? And I was just kind of staring at him, and the guys were like, they're like, oh my gosh, that's where he is. I just stood there. I froze. And then Sunseem looks at me and says, oh, and then he waves me to come in, and we're like, whoa, and we go and we just sit next to him. And he starts talking to us. Like, at that point, I realized why he eats alone. I really did, because the moment we sat down, he put his fork down, he put his chopsticks down, and then he just started talking to us. He didn't eat because we were there. And he talked about like the situation with Princess Diana, because we're in Europe at that time. He talked about, because we're from America, he talked about John F. Kennedy and when he got abolished prayer. He just started talking about these things that are relevant to us. It was really inspiring that he was talking like he wasn't like talking at us, but he was really connecting and talking to us, talking about Western things, about things that Westerners know, like Princess Diana, like the gun laws in America, like JFK. These are all things we could relate to. And it completely just broke the awkwardness. And it was just talking and talking. All of a sudden, he's like, "Hey, you guys hungry?" And we're like, you know, I told you, for better or for worse, I'm brash. I'm like, yeah, I'm hungry. You know, like most people are gonna be like, well, I'm just like, no, I'm hungry. Please feed me now. Stuff my face, right? I want to eat your food, right? And they order pizza, and there's like Sprite, and I know how much Sunseem likes Korean food, but he was eating pizza with us. He just left his food. He's eating pizza with us. Like, he's just trying to connect. It was really, really amazing when I look back at it right now. He started drawing pictures. He drew a picture of the Holy Spirit's body, and he drew a picture of my face. It's just so many different things that he was doing. And as we're talking, and then he stops, and then he says, "All right, you know, at that time, you have to know that Sunseem was writing the book of Salvation." So he's like, "Oh, you know, I gotta go back to work. So thank you so much for coming today." And then he just greets us. We are on like not cloud 9. We're like on cloud like 9 million. You know what I mean? And this is the thing. Okay, I'm not saying this just to be funny, but this is just kind of what was, you know, in my immature mind when I was 19, 20 years old at that time. So we finish, someone picks us up, we go all the way back to the hostel, and we basically come back at this, like a little, like the Japanese members already came back from their tour. And we checked our watches. I checked my watch after. And I looked at the time, and guess how much time had passed? 5 hours. We spent 5 hours there. Talk about nuts, right? So, you know, I was like, what? And we're all like freaking out, like, oh my gosh, that was 5 hours. And of course, when we get back to the hostel, I see the Japanese member there, and they're like, "Hey guys, what'd you do all day?" And I'm just kind of like strutting, like, yeah, you have no idea what I did today. Yeah, because like I was 5 hours, you were only 3. Yeah, right? So in my, you know, that's, you know, it's one of those funny moments that I had, but it was just really amazing because, even in that time, like I realized 2 things from this. Number one was, even when I was complaining and even was upset and angry, right? Like God was still listening to me. And it wasn't the prayer like the pre-dawn prayer. It wasn't those types of prayers. It was a prayer in my heart saying to God, why did they get 3 hours? I only get 5 minutes. And I'm sure God understood because I was still a baby in Providence, right? I was, you know, think about less than a year. And I was, you know, he still listened. He still listened. And for those of you out there, I understand that sometimes we might think that this is truth though. Truth is the most powerful prayers at pre-dawn. That is the most powerful prayer at the right time, right? But it doesn't mean that the other prayers are not heard. Yeah, it's not heard. The thing that matters to God most is it honest and is it sincere? And if you can give these prayers even, you know, like out of anger, like a little child, like me, right? At that time, you know, God's going to hear those prayers. And the second thing I understood was, like, if I wasn't that angry, you know, we would never have gone to see him because we would have gone on tour. So I also, in my heart, I was like, wow, you know, God really works in, you know, I'm not saying that you should be angry people, right? I'm just saying, God works through anger. No, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying that. But it was almost like when you think about what happened, no, it can't be close to Joseph because Joseph had injustice. It wasn't injustice with us because, you know, we met in 5 minutes. You know, that's not injustice. I can't say Joseph, yeah. I was going to almost make myself sound more righteous. But the one interesting thing is through that situation, we were able to meet with him. And my thing, the second realization I have for you guys is sometimes things may seem really like that's so unfair, that's so bad. But God is working through all situations. He really does. And through that situation that I thought was terrible, it turned out into something even way better. And this is why now I'm a little bit better at being patient and kind of seeing the situation out. Right? And I really hope that for you guys too, that as you listen to the second scenario, there's going to be a third scenario tomorrow, by the way. The story continues, by the way. I hope you guys can realize about our prayers and knowing that even in the most difficult times, sometimes things have to happen that way in order for the greater thing to happen. Right? So don't get discouraged, don't get depressed or feel like, oh God, I feel left out. Why don't I get this? For everyone, there'll come a time where all the things that we deserve and the blessings will come. So I hope that you guys will remain patient. You guys will become people that really keep in mind that God is always making his plans for those he loves. He only has good plans for us. So know that the things that happen bad is not the final plan. There is always something greater that happens. All right. So that finishes scenario 2 for today, and the message and the story continues. So I hope you guys will tune in for the one tomorrow too. So what does that mean now? Well, we all know what that means, because that means that the song has to come out. And you're like, hey, what song is this? And the only reason I'm stalling right now is because I turned it off by mistake. And I'm just using my words to give me just enough time to click back into the song. And I got it now. All right. I hope everyone had a wonderful time today, and you guys have a wonderful Tuesday, and we'll see you guys again tomorrow Wednesday on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. Have a good day.
Believe in yourself and believe that somebody.
Gotta believe in yourself, cause no one else will.
You have the power to